Hi everybody, I'm Erin from Ciudad Soil and Water Conservation District, and I'm here with Allison today, who is from Valencia Soil and Water Conservation District. We're at Whitfield Wildlife Conservation Area, and we've been talking to you a lot about the riparian ecosystem, the river that we live by, the Rio Grande, and the flooding that occurs and used to occur a lot more, and the changes that have happened because of humans. And so I came down here to visit Allison and learn more about Whitfield Wildlife Conservation Area. And so Allison, could you tell me just a little bit about what you do here, what you teach people about?
Absolutely. So Whitfield is a great place to learn about the riparian habitat because it's actually in the riparian habitat. And Whitfield is a nice place to look at flooding, to look at plants and animals and different places that they live in. It's a great place where habitat has been created. So some of the things that I like to do here at Whitfield is to show those different habitats through different activities. We work with many different grade levels, and we kind of look at those and then think about the important changes that are happening now and into the future. So this is a great place to really see habitat in action.
Ooh, habitat in action. I like that. So I'm curious, when we talk about habitat in action, what is happening right now? I mean, I know that this isn't a perfect situation here. We probably have some human impacts that occur on this site. What are some of those human impacts?
Absolutely. So some things that the kids always point out right away is our visitor center building, which is just on the other side of us here. And of course, you may hear those cars in the background.
Yep.
So we see the roads, we see a lot of power lines, we even see a ditch on our way in here. And even this path that we're on here is a human impact. And so even though we're restoring habitat here at Whitfield through our 100 acres, we still see and need human impacts, and we'll talk about some of those and see some of those as we make our journey around this area.
Awesome. I'm really excited to see this space. Let's get started.
All right.
So Allison, in our last two videos, we talked a lot using that model on the ground about the river and the historical changes that have happened to it, like how we've controlled it with dams and levees and jetty jacks to kind of stop the flooding because it was flooding into communities and creating a problem. But as we know, flooding is really important for this riparian ecosystem. A lot of the plants and animals depend on it. So, you know, one thing that's related to is groundwater, right? Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about what that relationship is?
Absolutely. So since we don't have any natural flooding here anymore, these plants and animals depend on that groundwater for the plants to grow and thrive here. And so the groundwater needs to be really close to the surface here. And so we want to know how close it is and how that's changed over time. So something that we like to do is track that data. And we have this well right here that actually does just that.
Wow.
And so when we open up our well here, we have this kind of this long stick here that actually will measure the groundwater on how low it is from where it's at here at the surface. So if we stick this in here, we would actually get about 4 to 5 feet below the surface, which means we'll find water about 4 to 5 feet, which is not that far, but we need that to be at that level for these plants and animals to grow here.
Right.
And I always ask the kids, where's the river from here? About maybe 2 miles that way, right? Well, the answer is actually 4 to 5 feet below our feet. And we can actually see that water if you look behind me at this pond here. So what we've done here, Erin, is we've dug a giant hole, and that hole has filled in with that groundwater. So that's an indication that it's about 4 to 5 feet below the surface.
So this is actually water from the river.
Yes.
Because that's what all these plants are tapping into as well, is the water that's underground comes from the river.
Yes, and it's really nice because it also has created habitat since we brought it up to the surface. So we have that groundwater brought up to the surface here to create even more habitat for our plants and animals to thrive in this environment.
That's awesome. You know, one thing I love about wetlands or pond areas is they're really good for helping to clean water, right? That they help that system that's like a natural kind of filter for water. So it helps with water quality too.
Absolutely, and that water quality, we have some great plants and animals that we see at this pond year round.
So Allison, this is a wildlife conservation area, right? That means that you're creating habitat to help animals live here and have space to be where they need to be, right? And so I'm seeing like this might be one kind of habitat. You might have different habitats in different areas. Can you talk about some of the animals that do live here and use this space as a habitat?
Absolutely, and we see many different animals throughout the year here. And one of my favorite things to do is to have the students list some of the animals that they may see at different times of the year, depending on when they're here. So right now we're here in the winter time, right? So it's a little quieter, a little colder, but we still see animals in this area. But some of the animals that we see throughout the year would be coyotes and cottontail rabbits and prairie dogs. We saw a lot of those holes as we were walking over here.
Yeah, in the ground.
In the ground, absolutely. And some smaller animals, we'll see some snakes, and we'll see some lizards. And of course, next to the pond, we'll see a lot of turtles. We'll see a lot of bullfrogs, and of course a lot of birds.
Yeah.
And the birds like to kind of hover around these cattails. So this is a great habitat for cattails as well. As you can see behind me, we have a lot of trees. So we have a lot of cottonwood trees that the birds like to sit in. And also we have this bat box that we've built here for habitat as well. Neat. To even bring bats in. And of course we can't forget about the fish, right? Yes, so we have habitat for even fish here throughout the year. And so this is a great place for a diversity of plants and animals to kind of take advantage of this pond and some of the plants around it.
Awesome. You know, when I got here, I heard a lot of those big birds circling around overhead. What are those guys?
So those are our migratory birds. Those are called sandhill cranes.
Oh yeah. And
we get a lot of sandhill cranes at Whitfield, and we'll see them here by the pond, but actually behind us, we'll see a lot of those sandhill cranes feasting on some of these grasses, and we'll take a look at the salt grass meadow. They like to feast on that grass as well. So we have habitat for birds here at the pond as well as in the conservation area. And cranes are one of my favorites because they're here during this time of year.
Yeah. All right, Allison, you just took me a little bit off trail. We kind of headed north of the pond, and now we're in this kind of middle-aged forest. What are we doing here? What's this place about?
Right, so this is our Candy Cordova Trail. This is kind of our forest area of the riparian habitat here at Whitfield. And I like this area because we can really see many different kinds of trees. So in the wintertime, we can't really see what kind of trees these are unless we really look at the leaves that have fallen down.
Yeah.
And so some of the trees that we have here are going to be the cottonwoods, which we saw at the pond. We also have, so you can tell because there's a lot of cottonwood leaves here that have fallen on the ground. And so we know we have a lot of cottonwood trees here. We also have a New Mexico olive, which is a common riparian shrub tree. We also have desert willows, which are really common. And we have screwbean mesquites that have these really cool seed pods.
Yeah, the chic.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's a nice diversity of life here with many different kinds of trees that make up this area. And that also helps create a healthy ecosystem. When you have that diversity of life and trees, that brings in a diversity of animals as well.
Awesome. Are those trees you labeled mostly native species?
Absolutely. So we do have a lot of native, which means they're from here.
Right.
And we do have some non-native species like the Russian olive and the salt cedar here at Whitfield. And those are good for habitat as well, but they can become invasive. And we talked a little bit about invasive species in our last video.
Right.
So
they can take over and
absolutely
get real dense.
So one of the things that we try to do here is to take out some of those invasive species and replace them and plant some of these native species. And in this area, we've had thousands of these different kinds of trees planted to create this forest.
Wow. Wow, who did all that planting? People?
All volunteers.
Cool.
Yeah, all volunteers of the area helped recreate. So that's one of the ways that we are restoring this area.
Awesome, awesome. But we talked about restoration a little bit, but maybe we didn't explain what it is. Can you explain what it is? What does it mean to restore something?
Absolutely. So to restore means to bring it back to a healthy state.
Okay.
So when we say restore riparian, we can't restore it to what it used to be. Remember how the river used to flood?
Yeah.
We don't have that
Meandered.
natural flooding here anymore. And we'll look at that when we talk about soil here in a minute. But because we don't have that, we try our best to restore the habitat to what it can be with the resources that we do have.
Yeah.
So it's restoring it, putting it back to a healthy state to bring in new life and new growth.
Cool. That's awesome. All right, Allison, well, you were just talking a little bit about restoration and, healthy habitat. Well, often I hear people talking about soil as an important part of the ecosystem, but we don't always give it a lot of attention because we just don't see it as much as maybe a big tree. But what role does soil play in this ecosystem, and how are you guys helping to restore it as well?
Absolutely. So soil is kind of the backbone of all of this. So we need our soil to be healthy for our plants to be healthy.
Yeah.
And we can tell that we have healthy soil in this place that we're at right here. So one thing that's a product of healthy soil are healthy plants and a diversity of plants. So behind you here we have a New Mexico olive.
Oh.
Now you can't tell in the wintertime, but if we look on the ground we can see the leaves, and that's what helps give it away that it's a New Mexico olive, because the leaves are really small, they're very tiny, they're long. So that would be a leaf from a New Mexico olive. And that's a native plant, very healthy. And over here we have a big cottonwood tree, and as we can tell on the ground, we got a lot of those cottonwood leaves here. So we have a cottonwood tree, and then right here, right next to me, we have a sheep willow. And if you look closely, you can still kind of see some of those leaves here on the willow. And the leaves look similar to our New Mexico olive, very long and narrow, but all very healthy to the environment. And a lot of animals eat the leaves. And so not only are these trees great for the soil, but they're good for the animals as well. So one thing we need is we need healthy soil. And healthy soil depends on a lot of factors, but there's one big factor. So what's in soil, right? You need to have water, you need to have air, you need to have lots of minerals, but most importantly, you need organic matter.
Okay, yeah.
And that's what we have a lot of here, which causes this healthy environment where we're standing. So organic matter is is a biotic product, right? So do you remember what biotic means, right?
Right.
You guys remember what biotic means?
Living?
Living, yes. So we need 5% of our soil to be living. And the living things in the soil are going to be organic matter from plants, the decomposition of plants, such as right here you can see the leaves.
Yeah.
So this leaf cover, or some people call it mulch, kind of holds in that water. So you want water in your soil, but they also decompose and add that organic matter to the soil as well.
Like nutrients, right?
Nutrients. So also composting would be something that people do to have their vegetables grow healthier in their garden.
Yeah.
So that decomposition of all of those fruits and all of those banana peels and everything else that you throw in there to make your compost, that adds healthy organic matter. Here in front of you, Erin, we have more coyote scat. So scat will naturally decompose. So if we were to say, is scat biotic or abiotic, we know that it's biotic because it came from a living animal.
Wow.
So we have scat, which slowly decomposes as well. So having a diversity of plants and materials on the ground that will help decompose and hold in moisture help add the nutrients and organic matter to our soil. Because naturally that flooding and erosion would change out our soil, but we don't have that flooding here anymore. So we depend on healthy plants and we depend on something covering that soil to hold in that moisture.
That's interesting, Allison, because I noticed when we were out on the road that we were standing on, which didn't have compost or mulch on top of it, and then you don't see as many diverse plants around. Is that because there's not enough of a variety of nutrients in the soil?
Absolutely. So we need that diversity, and when we cut those plants down and remove that natural organic matter, that soil doesn't have the health to that cycle. And so one plant actually does grow in really poor soil, and those are noxious weeds, we call them. Weeds like kochia or tumbleweeds or those goat heads that you find in your shoes.
Yeah.
Those weeds, we find so many of them because we have that poor soil that just doesn't have that organic matter to keep it healthy. So it's kind of the backbone to creating this healthy riparian ecosystem.
Awesome. So looking around, we have evidence above ground of healthy soil below ground.
Absolutely.
Very cool. So we've just been walking along this beautiful site. It's just so nice to be out in this space right now. And I heard lots of birds chirping along the way, saw these flocks of birds flying in together. There's definitely a lot of signs of wildlife in this area. So can you talk a little bit about this space and how it's different maybe from the other places that we were in already?
Absolutely. So one of the big things that we try to do here at Whitfield is we try to have different spaces to kind of get a more diversity of animals that kind of pass through this area.
Because different animals like different things, right? They need different kinds of shelter or food.
Absolutely. And so we're kind of trying to not only recreate that plant habitat that we talked about, we're also trying to recreate our animal habitat. And so since Whitfield is only 100 acres, we really try our hardest to kind of use the land in different ways to bring in many different kinds of animals.
Cool.
So an example, to this side, we have what we call our wet moist soil unit. And so we actually flood this. So you can see we have this ditch right here. So we'll open it up and we'll flood this area. So we have that nice lush grass. We'll even get some cattails will grow here. And we have an abundance of cottonwood trees. And so we get all kinds of different birds and even owls that come through this area. So this is a great habitat for our migratory birds and birds that we have year round. It's also a great habitat for rabbits as they can hide in that really tall, lush grass.
Yeah, I see that grass is really thick.
So it's a really great habitat for many different kinds of animals. And then over here, as we were talking about cranes earlier, so we have a lot of cover crop and we have a saltgrass meadow, and we always try to keep that soil covered for the health of our soil, but also our animals like to come and eat the grass, eat the seeds, so we try to have a cover crop year round. So we'll have giant, we call them food plots here at Whitfield. So we have giant areas of space with no plants, and then we have areas with lots of plants. And this was all purposefully done to get an abundance of different animals here as well.
Interesting. So you're growing food, but not for humans, for wildlife.
For wildlife, yes. Everything here is for wildlife, and to really, as we talked about, to really restore this area into the future.
Because what was this place before?
So this was actually an old dairy, and so we're still kind of using some of those man-made water sources to actually water our fields. So you can see kind of that old usage, but we're just kind of now turning into what we call a conservation area.
Awesome. So Allison, after we've toured this area and really thought about what does it mean to restore it, what are some of the things that you're doing to help bring this land back to a healthy what are some things that students or people that may not have an area like this to work with, what can they do to kind of help, do that kind of restoration on a smaller scale in, say, their neighborhood or where they live, or I don't know.
Absolutely. And so one of the big things here at Whitfield that we try to do is we try to show our students and our community members things that they can do and think about in their own homes. So some ways that students and community members could get involved is planting some of those native plants that we talked about, like the cottonwood trees or the New Mexico olives or the screwbean mesquites. So some of those, especially if you live in a riparian habitat, planting those will add that diversity to the soil and bring up more kinds of those plants. So something as simple as planting native species is something that we could do. And just planting plants in general, right? Bringing more oxygen back to our air, and so our air is healthier as well.
What if you're a student or someone that lives maybe in like an apartment complex, or you don't have a lot of land to kind of plant things on?
So it's also great to go out and track things and track changes over time. So something kids can do is just get outside and look at the trees around you and wonder what trees those are, why they're planted there, and look at those changes, especially the deciduous trees that lose their leaves in the winter time, and to see when they're losing their leaves and when those changes are happening. So tracking changes in the environment is one of the most important things we can do as people and as scientists.
That's awesome. I imagine they could draw. Sometimes I try to get out and draw things.
Yes, nature journaling, we call that.
Yeah, to bring more awareness to it.
And even just educating. So once we look and notice changes and think about questions we have, as scientists and as students, because we're all scientists, right? The best thing we can do is to educate others and to communicate some of these important things so we can make big changes on a large scale.
I think that's really important, Allison. I know that in New Mexico, a lot of people live with different generations in their family, so no matter what generation you are, if you educate your family, you're helping different generations understand this knowledge too, and that might help us, protect this land for a long time, because without habitat, without plants and animals, it's not going to be a really wonderful place for humans either, right? So
absolutely,
in the long term,
it's a giant cycle, and it's always neat to look at those different components of that cycle, and as we've been exploring how that has changed over time and what we can do about some of those changes.
Well, it's really neat to see what you're doing here for the future of a riparian ecosystem like this bosque, the habitat by the river, and I think that it's just been a really great thing to learn about, so thank you.
And thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us, and I can't wait to see some of the projects that you all come up with into the future, and I can't wait to touch base with everyone and see the changes that we're making together.
Definitely.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.